Welcome to Foreignness and Friendship, a series of podcasts. We present a number of bonus tracks connected to our radio show. You can listen to conversations with artists and activists, reports from festivals and other larger events, essays, reviews, poetry, and letters. We see ourselves as part of a non-binary rebellion with the intention of creating a language and a human condition beyond race, ethnicity, gender, sex, and class. Tear down these walls, dismantle the statues of power, and meet the other with an open spirit. Welcome to this conversation between Morten Ranum and the South African poet Kobus Moolman. We enter in the conversation halfway, because only halfway the microphone was switched on. Immediately when the two men met, they engaged in a conversation, and only later on Morten Ranum remembered that he intended to record the conversation. I was so lucky that I happened to be in Cape Town in the same week that Kobus Moolman was launching his new book, Foreignness. In my conversation with Kobus Moolman, we refer to the day before where the launch took place, in the book launch, one of Cape Town's two independent bookshops. We also refer to my translation of his earlier book, All and Everything, who was published into Danish almost 3 years ago. This is the first time that I actually meet Kobus Moolman. I have chosen to only edit the recording very, very slightly and maintain sometimes very long pause in our conversation, because these pauses are part of the reflection from both me and Kobus Moolman. So they are not only empty spaces, they are filled with loaded, poetic emotion. The conversation takes place in the restaurant The Electric in Canterbury Street, in the center of District 6 in Cape Town. There's somewhat a lot of noise around us, but it all contributes with meaning. And as we say at some point, you have to go with the flow. But somehow it's also part of the...
I like that.
And because it is very low, very low-fi phone and simple microphones.
Yeah.
So it is. So it is what
it is. What it is. It is what.
And I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and a lot of podcasts are very polished.
Yeah.
And actually, I get a bit annoyed because it's too much. But that is what you can do.
It's artificial. It's artificial.
Yeah, but this is what. Of course, it sounds nice, professional. So it's lacking something.
Yeah, for sure.
So I like this kind of.
I agree.
Noise,
Cool.
We were talking about translation, or I was starting to talk about translation, and of course it was because, I remembered, now that I'm sitting here with you, I'm remembering how it is to translate a book, All and Everything. And then I now remember that I met, there's a Danish translator who originally comes from Iran, or the family comes from Iran, so she has translated some things from from that part of the world into Danish. And she had this idea that I think she said there's 9 ways of translating a book, which of course was a joke, but it was a way of expressing that, okay, there's different ways of translating. So translating is not just replicates of the original text. And so therefore, because often you will be confronted with, how is this translation compared to the original? But maybe it is also possible to think about it in another way.
Yeah, I myself have never actually yet had the opportunity to participate as a translator in a particular project, and I think I would be very I'd be very keen, I'd be very open. It would be a really interesting creative project, because I do see translation as essentially a creative process. It's not, as you say, it's not a photocopy. It's not a photocopy in another language. It's not a photocopy in a different language. It actually is, in a way, a new creation. The translator is herself also a participant in the making of that particular piece in a new way. And I'm so for me, I was hugely flattered that you wanted to participate. No, yeah, exactly, and to enter into my poem, that collection, because what it meant for me was that here is somebody who wants to engage from their own being with those poems and make those poems through themselves. So they're taking those poems, but they're making them yours in a way. And I as I say, I'm like flattered by that, because it's like, I think it's so cool.
For me it was also, I think it was a bit, because it was the first time that I translated a full book, so to speak. Of course it's a rather limited,
very slim.
But it was interesting to experience that it was not that was a kind of also an engagement in 2 different languages, and a different experience than writing my own poems, because if I'm writing my own poems, I'm concentrated in another way. I'm not only concentrated about the language, I'm also situated in a certain kind of emotional state, or feeling my body or something. But here I was trying to almost, reenact what happened there in Midlands, and try to find places in Denmark was, maybe it is similar, or this reminds me of that place that I once was myself. Also, could I use this? Especially maybe because your poetry seems like also very situated in a certain kind of setting.
That's a very interesting observation. Yes, that's a really
also part of the discussion last time. I think risky.
It's a very, very, very important observation. My work is, let's just say, it starts somewhere. It starts somewhere. There is a where, and I well, like that particular All and Everything was very obviously and directly in a specific, it is a very, very, very specific place. I can take, well, the Foreignness change has been sold, I can't take you there now, but one could. Whereas, interestingly, this current book that I launched last night, Fall Risk, the where is more vague. I probably have quite deliberately in the book cut away specific references to specific places. So, for example, there is a poem in it that I can tell you honestly came out of an experience in the Kruger National Park. My brother-in-law is a wildlife vet. And so we have wonderful, wonderful opportunities to go out into the bush, literally into the bush with him. And you'll read it in the collection. I don't have the book with me, maybe you do.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it is.
Can I read it?
Yeah, of course. It's all about.
If you give me a second, I'll try and find it. Yeah. Muddy lumps of organs, black dried blood with flies. The thick neck of an hyena tugs at old sinew. And I wonder, whose stretched white self-importance is this? Whose belt? Whose rope? Whose elastic to hold together all of their hope? So that poem came out of a very, very specific moment. There had been a rhino that was poached, and they have to perform a necropsy on the carcass. So they try and extract the bullet and find the bullet so that they can actually do investigations. Because the rhino has been poached. So they can try and find who the poachers are. And they have to, in order to do this, they cut up the carcass in the veld, just there in the veld. They take it away to a sort of private area where kind of tourists, it's not going to get seen, it won't be seen. And it's a very, very, very gruesome process. They use chainsaws, they use axes to cut. It's just they're cutting up this carcass of this great creature. And so there's just, and of course, all the scavengers arrive, all the hyenas arrive, all the vultures arrive, and they're just waiting. They're just like, there's the circle of people, of cars, and there's the circle of people around. It was done at night using headlamps, and just outside in the darkness are all these eyes of the hyenas, and they're just waiting. They're just waiting for their chance waiting for us to go. And then, I mean, it's not a threatening situation at all. It's not threatening. There are a lot of them, but they're not threatening because there's too many human beings around. But they're waiting for their chance, Yeah. And then sometimes an hyena would sneak in and grab a piece of meat and run off, and then they'd fight. And they're pulling at the sinew between them. And I was just... But, so that's the beginning, that's the start of the poem. But then as I write, I know the poem's not about that. That's not what the poem is. That is the entry. And I'm interested in the other side.
Yeah, and then what comes out of
what comes out on the other side.
Oh, that's what you mean with the way.
Yeah.
There's this entry, but it very quickly disappears.
Yeah, it quickly disappears.
Not disappears, but it disappears.
Many readers I think, of literature or perhaps poetry, they only want to know, well, what happened.
Yeah.
That's what they think the poem is about. Like, so I don't tell people about that part, because then they think that's what the poem is. It's not. It's not about that. It's got little to do with
I think
that.
that there's a lot of readers, especially not trained poetry readers, but general literary readers, they have this idea that they want to go behind the text, or they want to know what happened, or they also want to know you.
Or they want to know, is it real? What really happened?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm often flabbergasted. What really happened? I don't.
Who was that? There was some writer that I talked to at some point who said that it is funny because if I write fiction, people want to know how much real life is in here. But if I write documentary, then they want to know how much fiction is in it. so I thought
You can't win. You can't
an
win.
absurd dichotomy because
exactly.
it doesn't really matter, because it's both texts.
Quite right.
It's both
but it's very
stories,
difficult to say to an audience, to a reader, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They have to. It's difficult for them to let go of that part.
Yeah, it is.
And so what we do, I try, even in like your one's readings, but particularly in my teaching, I try and train the students. Let go of that.
Yeah.
That's just the entry. That's where the poem or the story or whatever, that's where it starts. And you as a writer...
You're teaching creative writing.
Yeah. So when I get the student to write, it's about saying to them, don't try and copy that experience that you had. Take that experience, but then see what is on the other side of that experience. What is below the experience, or beyond it, or through it.
Yeah.
Like, Alice in Wonderland, going through the looking glass.
Yeah.
You don't look at the mirror and see yourself in the mirror. You're going through onto the other side. And that's
because
what means.
Otherwise literature is not really interesting if it doesn't transform itself or you.
But if you think about visual art.
Yeah.
If it's a painting of a tree, and it's just a painting of a tree, and a painting of a tree is a painting of a tree, like, so what?
Yeah.
Like, okay, it's a tree.
It's the way that it is done.
Exactly.
I mean,
it's the way.
There's an old Danish painter who was one of the, at that time in the 1800s, one of the few women who was allowed to paint.
Who?
Anne Anker.
You'll have to please write her name down.
And she's painting these women in rooms, and they are all these kind of everyday way women who are just in a room or by the window, or many of them are her sister or her grandmother or something. But the interesting thing about her is not these images; it is the light. That she's famous for. And there's always this light coming in the window. You cannot see the light, but the light is extremely strong. And you see the light, not the woman.
It reminds me so much of, I think he's Danish, Wilhelm Hammershøi.
Yeah. She's part of that.
She was probably period. Part of that same period.
Yeah.
And I need to, please, after this, I'll write her name down. Because I was so intensely drawn to Hammershøi's work a couple of years ago.
Kind of just layered painting where there's also light and shadow.
And there's nothing happening.
No, exactly.
But actually, there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening.
So I was just thinking about in terms of what is it really that is being portrayed in a painting, or what is it that the painting are doing, because what is good? Yes, then. Or maybe I can have another Americano.
Another Americano.
Yeah. Because that is an example of how you go to the other side or become something else.
As I see that. And that's why as I mentioned last night, I learned about writing poetry through looking at visual art.
Okay.
Well, in a way, maybe not as simple as that, but it's helped me get to the place of fully understanding that object is not necessarily the subject. So, for example, I love portraits and self-portraits. I just love them because of what in any successful portrait or self-portrait, you're actually not talking about that particular person who has a particular name, who lives at that particular street, who was that age when they were painted. It's like the mood, the energy, the thing, like Rembrandt's portraits and self-portraits. They just, there's like so much about life and suffering and humanity.
But I think also that the tradition of painting is interesting in this way, because you have examples of painters who simply painting the same thing all life, but it is or the same kind of also the same house.
No, but I'm thinking there's that Italian painter who painted bottles.
Yeah.
Giorgio Morandi, I think it's Morandi. I think it might be Morandi. He just painted bottles.
Yeah.
They're very small paintings, and he just painted bottles. That's all he did. Well, not all, but most of his life he painted bottles. And yet they are deeply moving.
Yeah,
because then
also because it's an almost obscene obsession with a detail. And I think that you can trace the same kind of tendency in poetry. I mean, I have realized that sometimes I have this idea of there's some images that pops up in the way I write, time after time, and then I think, okay,
it's interesting you say that.
It replicates itself. Of course, it changes a bit, but it is kind of the same image or the same kind of.
And I used to struggle with it within myself because, like I mentioned last night, I can say to you, stone, sky, tree, mainly. Night, moon. These are almost in a sense archetypes. And I struggled for a long time as a writer. I thought, damn it, why can't I use any words except stone? Why does I keep coming back to trees? Why do I keep coming back to sky? Am I weak? Now, am I limited? But slowly, I've begun to understand, no, this is my language.
Yeah, and it's actually about continuing that path, and time after time phrasing it again and again.
Yeah.
Because that is also a way of going deep in.
It is. And parts of the body. I always seem to be writing about hands. I'm hugely fascinated by hands. Because, of course, for me on one level, the hand, this is what writes. It's not me that writes. It's the hand that writes. And I often talk about it. The hand is writing. The hand. Almost as if it's something like something else by itself. But I wanted to get to something about keep the sun on my bare head, keep the sun on my bare back and on my chest and on my face. Keep the shining sky always in front of my eyes. keep the stony ground permanently beneath my black boots. The wind sits in between the pages of this book and the branches of thin acacia trees covered with small yellow blossoms. I seek no shade, no shelter from these mountains and this sun. I want to be stripped and dried out. I want to be bleached as a bone. I want to evaporate.
I'm thinking when you're reading it that, and if you, because you mentioned these elements, then it's almost like an architecture. That stone, sky, sun is kind of an architecture, and then this architecture is being recirculated time after time with a different context, different emotional states, and then there's words in between who kind of fill out the architecture.
I like that.
Yeah,
okay, that's cool.
It's interesting.
That's really cool.
You're mentioning these words, and then suddenly they become spatial. There's a space in the poem somehow.
Okay, I like that. I never thought of it like that.
But I think maybe also there's also something about there are things in this world, depending on how you see the world, that simply are so strong that it's the way you perceive it. And when you mention these elements, this is probably how you take the world in.
But it's also slightly changing the subject, but not necessarily. It's actually how I see poetry. I'm fascinated by the elements. Earth, air, water, fire. But I see poetry specifically, and I'm coming across quite arrogant in this way, but I think poetry is elemental. Poetry is of the elements. If poetry is intellectual or cerebral, to be honest, it's going to burn away, it's going to disappear. But the poetry that will remain will be the poetry of the elements, like fire, like water, like a stone. I want to make poems that are like the elements, that have that kind of like elemental themselves quality. They are not anything else. Fire is fire is fire is fire and will always be fire, and it does what fire does, and I want that.
So then there's also the focus on these elements is also maybe saying that the human is kind of a little bit in the background, or is there, but the elements are more important than what we could call. I mean, it is. There's no sense of identity in your poetry, as far as I can.
People
as
think,
opposed to, because there's another kind of poetry.
Sure there is.
Identity.
Exactly. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. And I use lots of eyes and all that kind of stuff. I do. And anybody reading my poems, anybody, will go, oh, there's a man with a bald head. There's a man with the big shoulders. There's a man
because he's displayed on the back.
He's displayed on. Well, okay. Yeah, but anybody who knows me vaguely, okay. Yeah. There's a man who's disabled. It's all of that kind of crap. And but just like we spoke earlier, and in the same way that like a painter will use his or her body, like I just love Egon Schiele. So his paintings, drawings of himself. Okay, now they're very grotesque and they're graphic and they're crude and they're rude. And he's not afraid to do things with his body, showing his body doing things. But actually, he knows that at the end of the day, it's not about himself. And he has the courage to say, I might run the risk of the audience thinking this is me, but those ones who really think carefully will know it's not about me. That's why it doesn't matter if I show myself masturbating, because actually it's not me. It's the human condition. It's us as people. It's again what we spoke about. He starts with the self, but then moves. I start with a place, but then you go.
And I think also that poetry has the ability of expressing this as opposed to, for example, prose, because in a lot of, not necessarily all prose, but this character-based and dialogue-based prose has this disadvantage of being a little bit, why do we have to have these characters, and why do they have to look so similar to the guy next on the street? And that is because it's not interesting. And that is also to refer to what I tried to say earlier, that poetry has kind of another. It's in the business of something else. It's more kind of like a cynic way of expressing yourself, or a sonic way. There's a rhythm, and there's a scenery, and there's a sculpture, and there's a kind of
It's in the business of something else, and it's taken me a long time to actually own that, in a sense, because it often feels, you're saying poetry is like more superior to other art forms or whatever, and I'm not going to say it.
No. But the problem is...
But the problem being is that to make poetry, you have to make it that way. You have to make it as if, and because it is the most important way of speaking, the only way of speaking, the ultimate form of expressing what is going on in the human condition and the human understanding of itself.
But I don't know exactly if it's the same in South Africa, but where I come from, poetry is often, there would be a lot of readers of literature who come to tell me, well, okay, we don't read poetry because we don't understand it. We don't know what to do with it.
Exactly.
So why don't you write a novel?
Yeah.
And besides, it will also be good for you to write a novel, because it will be read by more people. So there's this weird idea about that poetry is something very complicated, but it's actually not very complicated in my mind, because it's very simple.
It's actually not complicated at all. It's actually hugely uncomplicated. Yeah. You just simply, it's like standing in front of a Rothko painting or Jackson Pollock. Mm-hmm. You simply stand there. Yeah. Just stand. Yeah. All you have to do. Yeah. Stand and open yourself. But people like, okay, I must look for something. I must try and identify something. Yeah. I must try and figure. No, you've already lost. You've lost. You won't get there. Yeah. And it's the same with the poem. I just open it and allow it to come to me. To like wind, just blows.
Yeah, maybe it's also because I'm thinking that many of our daily lives are they are kind of almost super narrative, like kind of an exaggerated narrative which we live and which we also tell and other people tell us. So we have kind of lost this idea of what poetry and we have lost the moment where we don't explain anything.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Don't analyze anything.
That's true. Where we don't explain. And I've come to realize my poems are their only explanation. Yeah. They are the explanation. They must speak for themselves.
That's also where you ended.
Yeah.
At some point last night, I remember that.
We just, I shamed this poor young student. She was trying to ask me when was the first moment that I felt to this other side in a poem, and it's so you can't actually answer that kind of question. It's the person themselves need to have been there and understand it. But it's fine. We understand where she's coming from, and I respect, and she was curious, and I like curiosity. So curiosity is good.
I remember maybe a more prosaic moment many years ago where there was, in Copenhagen, of course, there's all these open scene where young poets come and read, and then sometimes the organizer will invite a grown-up author to come and read, so you can see how that sounds like. And then there was one time when there was this nowadays very famous Danish writer coming, and then somebody asked him, so what is your advice for somebody who wants to be a writer? How? And then he says, I think my advice is that you just have to stand at this wall and wait until the door opens. No, let me rephrase that. You have to stand and lean against this wall, and then one day somebody will build a door here, and then when they open it, then you are there ready. Which I think was a very, very beautiful image.
But it left the poor person completely confused.
You know, this idea of you don't have to do it. You have to do what you are doing.
Yeah.
Because that is the only thing you can do.
That's the only thing you can do.
So, and this is also somehow the simplicity of the craft somehow. Right? That or if you are not going to wait till you get there, then you better do something else.
Precisely, exactly. If you can't lean against that wall and keep standing against that wall for a long time, you better get out. Just go and do something else. Go and play golf. Go and drive motor cars. Go and race motor cars. That's fine. There's no issue with that.
And there's also this young woman poet in Denmark who will never really be able to write anything really fantastic, but she's continued doing it, and I respect her for that, because she keeps on, and she also gets some single poems published somewhere in journals, but it is not good, and it is very kind of about her own identity and very therapeutic poetry. But she has been doing it for more than 10 years, and she has been very steady.
Well,
and she's always coming and delivering her poems. And so I'm saying, okay, maybe you're not a great poet, and that's all right.
That's okay.
But I respect your
the fact
enthusiasm
that you show up,
and your patience, and your kind of joy also about other people's poems.
Okay.
So
I can relate to that. No, I can relate to that. And even here in the South African scene, I can see people like that that you describe in the poetry scene. Morten, this is it's good to talk about poetry like this.
Poetry is and it is good to finally meet you, because
well, thank you.
Interesting, and it was just a strike up. It was very interesting because I think I received Ulana's newsletter, and then I saw there was a new book, and then I knew that I was coming to Cape Town. So I wrote to Book Lounge to see, please leave a copy for me, then I'll pick it up in February. And then later on I realized that I was allowed in the exact same week that I'm here, so it was
fantastic.
So it was
and then we could actually meet each other.
It's interesting.
I mean, that is
coincidence.
Well, it's not coincidence. It's meant to be. These are the things that I believe in. It is how it is. That's how the universe works for us. I believe that.
And this also, I have this experience that if I come back to the same place many times, then things also begin to happen on that. Then I have kind of deeper and deeper experience of the place, and I think it's because that you kind of you dig deeper in a place if you come and go, and it takes time. That is also kind of say, anthropological patience that you have to
Yes,
deliver
yes.
to get something back.
Yeah, you got it. Yes, and something. Yeah. Well, I'd be interested. I don't know how you work. Whether you work with, these are. It's a long book. It's not that long, but I know you were attracted to All and Everything because it was a short cycle of poems.
There was something I have discussed it with some of my friends in Denmark also, that there's something very huge about that text, because it's very, very simple, but it's also, and it's very, you can just read it and if I go to an event, I can actually read the whole book.
Yes, you can read the whole book.
Because it doesn't take...
Yes.
So, but there's also some you get into this kind of trance.
Okay. Yes.
Meditative state.
Meditative. Yes.
Which, so you get into the way I think you wrote it. You also, as a reader, get into that sentiment.
Yeah, totally.
And the wording is beautiful, and I had this session with the translation with some of my friends. She's not a literary professional, but she has been reading a lot of poetry and worked a lot and wrote poetry when she was young also. And we had a lot of discussions about this, the English-Danish translation, and it was. And I think the language is very beautiful. There's something very attractive that's other than not only that it's very short and concentrated, but there's also some very subtle experiences of very, very almost banal everyday. And the way you see in the horizon this hilltop, which is, it is. When you talk about it, it seems very kind of prosaic.
But it's not. But you know it's not. You know what next time when you come back to South Africa, there's a place you must go to. Maybe if you do, I'll take you there. It's a bit of a drive. Okay. It's an 8-hour drive.
Okay.
In the Karoo.
In the Karoo. This is...
kind of central, in the center, sort of dry, arid part of South Africa. There's a little village called New Bethesda.
So this is kind of south of Bloemfontein.
Oh yes. South
west or something.
Yeah, southwest of completely. Yeah, south of Bloemfontein. If you could look at it on the map.
Yeah. Okay.
It's interestingly probably that's where my first book started. Time Like Stone was written there. And that's, I think, where I consciously understood that I had a connection with stones. And it's a little village, probably only a few hundred people. There are no street lights. There are no traffic. There are no street lights. There are no traffic lights in the village. There's like one shop. You can't buy petrol there. There's no, unless a couple of the farmers in the area will probably sell you petrol. They will. Lots of accommodation in the village. Lots of places to stay. And lots of these old trees. Because there's a magic quality to the place. It's in a valley, and there seems to be an underground source of water, very deep underground source of water that has never dried up forever. And so there are these huge trees in this very arid area. Suddenly you're driving through this arid area into these hills, to these mountains, and suddenly you come to this like oasis, and because of that there's just this magic quality to the village. It's worth. And I write a lot. Whenever I go, I try and go there at least I go back, at least I can once a year, but maybe I don't get it right.
Yeah.
My wife and I went back now in January. We hadn't been back for about 2 years, but yeah. So maybe 2 or 3 years I try and go there and just sit quietly.
Yeah.
It's a place of stillness.
Yeah.
You just sit and you see the hills and you hear the sheep coming through the streets and the horses. The horses just...
This reminds me of one of my first thoughts when I came to South Africa and was driving kind of across the country, was that there's so much, compared to where I come from, there's so much, so to speak, apparent, not empty land, but
I know what you mean.
Space somehow, which is incredible. And you have this impression, if you come from a very populated area of the world, then you have this, that there's nothing there. There's just these fields and stones and mountains. And so it was, but of course there are things,
the people living there.
From where I come from.
And that's what attracts me, is the sense of space.
Here, my conversation with Kobus Moolman ends. It doesn't really end, it just ends. Or I stop the recording because we continue talking. It is not possible in any other way. He's a very emotional man with his body in the words, and you can see that it is a reality. The poems and the body and the poets is an organic entity. He is both somehow humble and shy, but also extremely expressive, which he also showed when he was launching his book Fall Risk the day before, where he was sitting in a chair and you could see his body trying to be the right way for the words that will follow. And I think that the conversation you just heard also show that mentality. Also shows that here we have an artist who are really trying to express himself as precisely and honestly as possible. After I ended the recording of our conversation, we of course continued with the conversation. Part of that conversation was a gracious gift from Kobus Moolman's side towards me. He said at the very end, before we departed, that he wanted to invite me into a project. And very quickly, we had defined some kind of conversation project, some kind of poetry project that we shall do together. It will start with me writing to him, and thereafter him responding to me. Maybe we will share poems, read poems, but we will reflect on poetry. We will express what is poetry, what is conversation. We do not know where this will lead, but I immediately thought, yes, of course, this is what we must do. Sometimes life is very easy. It explains itself. As Kobus Moolman himself said during the book launch as response to a question, the only thing I can do to explain what is happening when I'm writing, to explain poetry, is to read the poem itself. You have listened to a bonus track by Foreignness and Friendship. If you have built up an appetite for more, then you can follow us on thewhiteafricanblogspot.com and walk in our footsteps by stepping into In My Footstep WordPress.com. We broadcast new episodes of our radio show every first Tuesday of the month, available on your preferred platforms.